Hello, hello, hello. We are back for another episode of Entrepreneurs Unplugged. I am Tanisha Stolniker, CEO of SBS. We are your systems and automation team. And so I have an amazing guest with me today. But as always, we have to check just to make sure that all the technology that we are using is working. And so let's see, are we live on LinkedIn? That one works. Now let's see if Facebook is cooperative today. It is. We just need to edit the audience and then we are good to go. Boom. All right. And Instagram is getting there. So let's see. Okay. All right. So I have here Miss Victoria with BrandWell Designs, and I'm just so excited to have her as a guest for a multitude of reasons. We have some connections in common, and we have like not directly crossed paths, but kind of indirectly crossed paths in the past. But then also just the nature of her business and the overlap of some of the things that we do and some of the tools that we use is going to be really cool. But also because of the topic she picked, hiring and scaling a team. And I think that is an amazing topic. I'm super passionate about it myself. And so I'm just excited to be able to kind of chop it up with somebody. As always, I have to give my disclaimers. Dogs in the house, husband's not in the house yet. The neighbor's getting their yard trimmed. Anything is possible. Victoria, you have any disclaimers for people to be aware of?
We have a full-on basement renovation happening underneath me right now. So anything, I'm going to try and mute myself when needed, but hopefully it's not too
bad. well, the noises aside, go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Tanisha. I'm excited. I own BrandWell Designs. As you mentioned, this is a branding and website design agency for female service providers. I have been doing that for about 6 years now, which is kind of hard to believe, but I also don't really remember a life before BrandWell. So I'm also a mom to 2 little girls. I'm married to my husband, James. We live here in Virginia. And then last year, I actually launched a new facet of my business. So for the last 5+ years, we've offered branding and web design services to creative females. And I realized that there was a little bit of a gap in even just the understanding of the word branding, that, you know, a lot of people chalked it up to just visuals, when really to build a powerhouse brand, there's a lot more that goes into it. There's a lot of strategy. So I also launched a sister company to BrandWell called the Branding Business School. And that is just an online classroom where it's also female founded, female educated, where you can just learn from other female founders how to craft a powerful brand. At the end of the day, how to build a brand people want to buy from. So that's what I do for a living when I'm not with my 3 and 1-year-old girls.
Awesome. How did I not know you were in Virginia?
Yeah, I am. Because you are too, right?
Yes.
Yes, I'm in Lynchburg, Virginia.
We're going to be there in the end of May.
Oh my goodness, such a small world, a small world. So you mentioned we can just like kind of tie the loose end for your audience. You mentioned that we had kind of indirectly crossed paths. So we're both proud HoneyBook users. I've used HoneyBook in my business for like 4 years. And HoneyBook had invited me to go to their partner conference in San Diego, or San Francisco, I should say, last year at the end of the year. And I had a trip already scheduled with my family. And so I sent my chief design officer, Libby, and Libby connected with you and just had great things to say about you. And she's like, you need to connect with her. So here we are.
I love how that works out though. And I keep pressuring them to do it again so we can actually like hang out more in San Francisco. But side note. All right. So given what you do and what your business focuses on, I was really intrigued by you picking the topic of hiring and scaling your team. So talk to me about, I guess, why that topic stood out to you.
So I mentioned that I have young children and that my business is about 5 years old, 5-6 years old. We're going on year 6. I started BrandWell in 2018. I was working full-time for a web design and marketing company. And as I, developed, I started, understanding that I had this knack for website design. So I started freelancing for other people who wanted the services that I could provide. And I started to think, okay, this is going to be my job someday. I'm going to eventually get to the point where I can ditch the full-time job. I can ditch the 9-to-5, have my own company. And so as I was working full-time, I was starting to kind of plan out what this life would look like. And not everyone's situation is this way, but I was married to my husband at the time who was in PA school. And there was no like, oh, we're just going to dive into the deep end. We're just going to like quit the full-time job and, start this, just live the dream. There was a lot more like financial preparation that had to take place in order for me to take BrandWell full-time. So I worked for almost 2 years side hustling BrandWell nights and weekends while having a executive level position at a web design firm. And by the time that I was finally financially ready, my husband was graduating school, he was finally getting his job. We were pregnant. So when I took the leap into entrepreneurship full time, I was also pregnant. And I knew that if I wanted to like finally get to have this dream of mine of owning a successful company, I was going to need help. Didn't know exactly what it would look like, but I think it was helpful that I had just spent 2 years running BrandWell on marginal hours. I only had 10 to 20 hours a week to run the company. And I was already kind of thinking in terms of scaling. I was thinking in terms of how can I replicate myself? How can I do more with less time, even before I had children. So I'm grateful for that side hustle season because it allowed for me to kind of already be looking at a company in such a way where I knew it was never going to just be me running BrandWell. I knew that if I didn't hire, if I didn't ask for help in certain areas, then my company would only ever grow as much as I had time to pour into it. And so really before I even officially had left my full-time job, I had already hired my first white label designer. And so what that looked like, it was a contract position. I have both employees and contractors now, which we can get into, but I hired my first contractor. I found her via Instagram. I just posted like, hey, I need a designer. Is anyone interested? And I still very much like held the reins really close when I first hired, which I know a lot of entrepreneurs do. It's hard to give up control in your business. But just that first hire gave me such a taste of what could happen. I hired, this girl was great. She's no longer with me now, but she was an excellent first hire. And I saw that where I might have been able to do 2 to 3 websites a month on my own, with her help, I was able to do 3 to 4. And then, if I hired another, I could do 5 to 6. So I started to be able to see that scaling was possible, and it didn't necessarily mean more time poured in from myself. It kind of was just more strategically bringing the right people alongside me to allow me to create more content, produce more for clients, and therefore drive sales for my business.
So a couple things. One, I think, well, thank you for sharing your story, but I think it's really cool to kind of see how you and I both have teams now, but went about it completely different ways. Yours definitely is probably a better way than mine.
How did you do it?
No plan at all. I was I guess I'm suddenly a business owner on just the first day of the year. And that was not really the plan. I got my master's, I'd done recruiting for years. And I had an idea that I was going to like plan my business and spend like a year putting a plan together while I worked, pay off student loans for my master's, things like that. And 3 weeks after I got my master's, I got laid off.
Oh, wow.
And so I was like, okay, well, I have a couple of choices. I can find another job knowing that I'm not going to stay, or I could just jump in. And so I talked to my husband and I was like, so I have an idea. And he's like, what is it? I was like, yeah, I'm not going to go back to work. I don't think I want to do that. And he's like, okay. So what's that look like? And I was like, I don't know yet. It's going to be a business. I don't know what the business is. Give me a couple months. Cause this was literally right before Thanksgiving. And I was like, by the first business day of the year, I will have it together. And I did, ish, but I was by myself that first year. And it took that first year of making lots of mistakes and doing it very, 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 very messy. And then going into the second year is when I finally started to realize what I actually enjoyed doing, and getting into the systems and more of the tech side of things. I was doing a whole lot with Kajabi. And so then I started getting busier. So that part starts to track where it was like, I could do this much by myself, or I could maybe find somebody to help. And so I found someone who, it was a fluke networking call. And when she introduced herself, a lot of what she was doing was what I was doing. And I was like, you seem kind of cool. Let's see how this goes. But I had zero goals of hiring a team.
Hmm.
And, I fought it for a while. I had a couple of people and people like, oh, you're building an agency. I'm like, nope, not doing that at all. I just got a small team. And
Yeah.
I think I fought it for probably about a year and a half before I finally used the word agency. Um,
Yeah.
so it's interesting to see the intentionality and how you did it compared to me going with the flow, probably
Yeah.
off hill
And
at
it
times.
sounds like we were in different seasons of life
Yeah,
too. I mentioned that I got pregnant and I actually put in my notice like the day after I found out I was pregnant because it was, for me, it felt like my free ticket out, right? Like, okay, I know I already have this like entrepreneurial dream, but now I'm going to be a stay-at-home mom and it all makes sense. I could have maybe a more genuine conversation with my boss at the time, just be like, listen, like I'm just slowing down, even though that was not at all the case. I was not slowing down. I was definitely ramping up. But for me, I worked in corporate America for about 4 years prior, and I worked with a lot of people that were just a few years ahead of me. I was in my young 20s when I worked there. They were all in their late 20s, early 30s. They all had young families, and really, I listened to a lot of my coworkers, a lot of the female coworkers that I worked with, kind of complain about how they had to put their kids in daycare all day because they had to work. And at the company we worked for, like you had to have full-time daycare, even though it was a remote position. And I just felt like, you know what, that's not what I want for my life. Like if I have the opportunity to do something else where I can choose whether or not I have to put my kids in daycare and I don't have to be told by somebody that I have
yeah,
to, that was really motivating for me. So I would say that was probably the underlying motivator of why I started a team. Now that I have more than 10 people on payroll, there are a lot of other benefits.
yeah.
In addition to scaling, I just got back from my 3rd annual team retreat where I took my girls to Nashville. Something that's unique too is I have an all-female design team. So BrandWell, woman owned and operated. That didn't actually start out as like a shtick, 6 years
Yeah.
ago when I was building it. It was just, I hired people that I felt understood my vision, that I felt could carry out the mission of BrandWell. But now I have this incredible group of women and just these creative minds that we get to collaborate with, and getting together with them in Nashville for a weekend was so fun. And I realized that this has added a whole new layer to entrepreneurship that has made it so much more enjoyable for me. Not only am I home with my kids most days of the week, working in kind of those fringe hours, or I have, a babysitter come in for a few hours here and there, but also entrepreneurship's not lonely. Like the
Yeah.
girls that I work with are some of my closest friends now because I communicate with them all the time. And if you're listening to this and you're, in that season of like young parenting where you have little children, that season can be a little bit isolating, like we're not into the sporting events and school and all of that yet. Like my oldest is not even 4. So this has added a layer of community to me in an otherwise very isolating season of entrepreneurship and being home with small children that is invaluable.
Again, lots of overlaps between our businesses, but still like it's just so weird like listening to you where it's like we are similar in doing it differently, which is still really
Mhm.
cool because I have a completely all women team as well. Also not intentional. I think it came out for me because as I started to hire people in other countries and
Mhm.
learn about their cultures, and in a few cases, they were really just kind of uncomfortable with men. And
Mhm.
while, yes, we have clients that are men, and, for a little while, they just weren't all that comfortable with them. But I think it was one of those things where once we got to know one another, I just felt very protective of people in other locations, for things that we take for granted in
Mhm.
America. And it was
Yeah.
just like, if you're in a country where I don't ever want somebody who's on my team who's providing value to feel uncomfortable. And with clients, it's one thing because they're not in our business,
Right.
but from all of our internal team meetings and conversations, I really wanted it to be where they felt super comfortable being human, whether it's they're a mom, they're not a mom yet, all of, having a team all over the world. and listening to some of the conversations about like, why aren't they married yet? And all these things, and being able to have that, just that open conversation of women amongst women. I knew that the second I threw a guy into that mix, it would all change. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean that it never will change, but right this second, I love that little like family vibe that we have.
Yeah.
I am jealous that we cannot hop on a train or plane to Nashville really.
Yeah.
I don't know how I'm gonna get somebody quickly from Cape Town to Nashville, but we're still trying to figure out what's the most central place in the world that everybody
There
can
you go.
and yes, we are at different stages. I love that you're doing this while starting your family. I have a 28-year-old that is married and out of the house, and I have my
Amazing.
13-year-old imported daughter that I homeschool. But that's where my change also happened with the business was COVID, and then taking her from being in school to being virtual, then now being homeschooled for the last few years. So having a team for me has been really helpful, not just in scaling
Mhm.
the business. And yes, it absolutely does quell that loneliness feeling, that you're floating on an island feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, there's times when I might ask their opinion where it's like, I got nothing. Like, what do you guys got?
Yeah.
So being able to put our heads together to come up with ideas is invaluable. But also, I know that within a certain amount of reason, except for the fact that I probably still do all the sales of the business, during the summer, I am in that sports life. I have a year round, she's a year round swimmer, and then she also adds on summer swim. So we're about to get into the season where for 3 hours every morning, I'm sitting in a pool. And for a few evenings, I'm at a pool. And then a few weekends, I'm also at a pool. And so my team really steps up during those times to
Yeah.
keep things floating to where I don't have to check in nearly as much, because they know that from mid-May to August, I'm, at a pool. And so
Yeah.
COVID a couple of times, I've had spine surgery. I have had a couple of vacations, thankfully, and just the peace of mind of knowing that the clients are still very well taken care of is priceless.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I brought on my first team member maybe 6 months to a year before having my firstborn daughter. And so that maternity leave looked very different from the maternity leave that I took 18 months ago when I had my second daughter, because I didn't have this baby team of people who were just kind of learning the ropes of BrandWell. At this point, I had managers, I had full-time salaried employees, and it was kind of foreign to me. And I think this is probably true for most entrepreneurs, to just take true time off of my business, but to also know that sales were still coming in, clients were still being served. Like that, I think is like the pinnacle of entrepreneurship, when you can get to a point where you can remove yourself from the business and the business keeps running.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I have a question. So you hired your first person as a contractor, but you have employees now. At what point did you decide or know that it was time to transition from one to the other?
That's a really good question. And that was something I really struggled with for about a year and a half. So I do still have contractors on my team now. And then I have 3 employees. So Brandwell got to a point where we were growing, like doubling in size every single year. And my family was doubling in size for the last couple of years. And so I felt that I really needed somebody that could start to run the day to day for me. I think what made me a good entrepreneur and what makes me a good entrepreneur is I love being the visionary. I love to kind of look long term and not just like at the here and now. So I had all these ideas of like what I wanted to do for BrandWell, and yet I felt that I was a little bit too ingrained in the day-to-day operations of the business to really take action on implementing some things that would need to happen in order to achieve these longer term goals. So it was a very organic thing. I had at the time 2 contractors that had both been with me for more than 2 years.
Okay.
And they were just the perfect fit. They loved BrandWell. They knew it like the back of their hand. Again, I had hired them shortly after even starting BrandWell, so we had kind of built it together. And I felt very, very comfortable letting go of some of that control, because it wasn't a new person that I just found on LinkedIn or something, right? It was somebody that had already seen the back end of my business for a couple of years. So we just had some good open dialogue together, me and these contractors. They were expressing interest in a full-time position just to have more stability, more financial security. And I was prepping to have my second baby, and it just kind of worked out where I had been saving up for a change like this, where I could convert two of my contractors. I actually did it at the same time, which I wouldn't necessarily recommend to people, because it's a big commitment to say, like, no matter what happens, this is what you're getting paid every 2 weeks. But I converted both of those girls, Lauren and Libby, who are still with me as my managers, into my first full-time employees. I became an employee of my business several years ago, but they were my first two managers that I brought on. And it was really so that, one, I could have more say over the hours that they were working, because obviously with contractors, legally, you cannot tell them when to work. And I felt that, if we're serving up to 50 clients a month with design services, I want to make sure that we're communicating with our clients in an 8 to 5 window. We're treating this like a professional business, because that's what our clients expected of us. So there was that component of it. And then it was also really just about making these girls feel like they were part of the BrandWell family. Like, hey, I don't just view you as a freelancer. Like, you are every bit as much of this business and this vision as I am right now. And it was definitely the right move for BrandWell at the time.
Absolutely. I love that. So let's talk, if there are some, and if there aren't, I'm just going to call you a unicorn. Have you had run into any mishaps or like hard lessons learned when it came to growing and building your team?
Yes, I certainly have. Growing a team it's this simultaneous balance of, like, this is adding so much work to my plate, but they're also taking off a lot of work, right? Because managing a team is not passive, especially when you have a remote team. Everybody's in different locations. Like, this business supports my family. This business is something that I created 6 years ago as a dream, and I want to see it carried out well, right? So I don't take that lightly. I don't take this investment into these girls lightly. And while I want to, create an incredible company culture for them, I want to give back to them, I expect something in return, right? I expect that they're going to responsibly carry out the mission of BrandWell with me every day. So, I am a very non-confrontational person. And I think that is probably the hardest part of having a team for myself. My husband, no problem. He's like, I'll be the firer for BrandWell. Like, anyone you need fired, let me know. Like, he just doesn't. And that might be true of guys in general, where they're less emotional about things.
He sounds like me.
Yeah. But that is, I had to let go of somebody just in the last calendar year. And I lost sleep over it for like weeks before doing so. And it was like a very, it was a mutual thing. Like, it worked out fine. It wasn't a full-time employee. It was a contractor, but that was so hard for me to do, just because the thought of letting somebody down, that's like crippling for me. Call it an Enneagram 3. I don't know. So that's been hard though, because I've realized that, good managers, they do lead and they do hold you accountable. And I look back to previous managers that I've had in my career before BrandWell, and I'm grateful for the times that I got called out, or the times that I was challenged to work a little harder or do a little better. It made me who I am, right? It helped prepare me to be the entrepreneur that I am today. And I want to be that for the girls that I've hired. I don't want to just create this cushy work environment where it's all fun and they're really never being challenged or stretched. But that does not come naturally for me. Like, all the leadership podcasts, all the courses, I have to take them, because I feel like I'm really good at inspiring and encouraging and motivating. I'm less strong in the area of discipline and just holding people accountable. So that's been hard. But then also, in terms of just like things that have come up that are tough when you have a team. Yeah. I've had instances, and I've had to really learn from my mistakes now. But I had one instance a couple of years ago where we were offering Show It website design, and I only had one Show It designer on my team, and she was a contractor. And she decided to up and leave midway through a project. Well, I didn't know Show It design. I didn't have anyone else on my team. So that was really tricky. And it taught me that there's safety in numbers. I have now a design team of 7 designers. So if one girl up and leaves, I can certainly have that client be passed over to another designer. And so that's also why, we are a Squarespace web design company. We're all trained on the same platform now because I got burned. I had to go, and I think I paid somebody like $120 an hour to finish that project. I lost so much money on it. I did what I had to do, but it was a really good lesson for me in hiring that never put all of your eggs in a basket that could up and leave you.
Amen. So it's funny. I have an advantage when it came to growing the team from being a recruiter for years. So finding talent is not really something that I have an issue with. Therefore, firing talent is also something that I have a lot of practice in. When you have to fire, 50 people at one time in person, you kind of get over it really quickly from that point on.
That sounds like I'd be living my worst nightmare.
Yeah. I grew some nicknames in those jobs, but for me, I went like the first year, everyone that I hired was like one at a time. And then I decided, because we were growing, I made a joke. I was like, it's like Field of Dreams. When I hire somebody, more business comes. So I'll just keep spreading it out and hire another person. Some more contracts come in. And so we were growing to a point where I hired 7 people at one time.
Wow.
And the processes, or lack thereof, that I had for those 1 or 2 or 3 at a time completely went out the window when I decided to bring on 7 at a time. And it's like, what do you mean Microsoft is going to be $800? Because I'd been paying for Microsoft products because that's what I used in corporate. And it was fine, one person at a time, paying for an annual email subscription here or there, or paying for ClickUp for 1 or 2 people, or, all the internal tools. But bringing on the 7, not only was it expensive, so I made some quick changes, but also just their onboarding, the attention needed, where it was like, now I have 7 people eager and excited. Day one, they're in Slack, and all I'm getting is pings. And it's like, where do we start? What are we going to do? What are we going to do now? And I'm like,
yeah,
leave me alone,
yeah,
because I really hadn't. It was such a whim when I screened and interviewed them that they all like clicked, where it was like, oh my gosh, they're so strong with this. And historically, I only hire like 1 or 2, but I was like, these 7 are great. So I'm just going to bring them all on. And I was like, yeah, lesson.
yeah.
The other thing was the first 4, because yes, I've managed teams. I tend to be very direct, where it's like, here are my absolutes. And outside of that, doesn't matter to me when you get the work done, just stick to the deadline that you agreed to with a client, be honest about your skills. If you feel overwhelmed, wave the flag before the client notices, because life happens. I don't like surprises like that. I'd rather you tell me, and then we can work it out. And then document everything. I have that old school, if it's not documented, it didn't happen type of thing. And I'm like, the documentation helps me protect not just SVS, but you. And so those are the absolutes. Outside of that, I'm pretty flexible to just about anything. And so the first 4 people, it was like, I didn't want to feel like I micromanaged them or employed them, because people try to employ their contractors. And so like, what's your rate? Great. I'll just pay you what your rate is, and it's like, you pick a project that you want to work on and tell me when you're going to have it done. And I'm just going to trust you.
Yeah.
And it worked until it did not work. And when I got burned, because I hired somebody who was extremely smart, she's very brilliant, but horrible with time management, and chaotic life, house full of kids, husband, animals, things, just lots of moving parts. She did not have the bandwidth to sit and focus her time on very time sensitive projects. So I then had to hire somebody to come behind her and then pay them to fix it, And so a few of those things happened within like a month period, where it was like, okay, we're going to have to throw this whole thing, not the people, but throw this whole process out of the window and start over. And so it was an expensive lesson that year, but I am thankful for it because it's made it so much more seamless now when it's time to bring on people. I only really hire twice a year at this point. And
Mhm.
it's also helpful for my clients when I'm talking to them and I'm hearing them saying, oh, hey, I'm going to go hire these 5 people. And it's like, really? To do what?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I just know I need some help and they're going to take it off my plate. And then it's like, hey, let's slow down for a second. Let me tell you a story. Story about a girl who messed it all up because you're about to do the same thing. So
Yeah.
being able to learn from those mistakes has also added value for me with my clients when they're about to go down the same rabbit hole. And I can
Yeah.
say, wait a minute, let's slow down a bit and get you some support here.
Yeah.
So it's there's some pluses in some of those lessons. So
Yeah. Something that worked really well for me, and I would recommend this to anyone who is slowly building out their team. Maybe you've made one or two hires and you're considering making another, but maybe don't necessarily see how that would be possible. Or we mentioned how having a team is a lot of work and we're constantly getting pinged then from all these people. That was a big part of my transition from having all contractors to making a couple employees because I needed somebody else to field all those messages. I had probably 5 or 6 contractors at the time. And if everyone has one question a day, that's a lot of meetings you're jumping on.
yeah,
And in my mind, I kept kind of having this back and forth of like, wait, why did I hire a team, right? Like I hired a team to free me up to work on the business. And yet now I'm just answering their questions and putting out fires all day. And so that made me want to look at, okay, who do I already have on the team that could become the point person? So BrandWell has a lot of, hierarchy in it where my girls know they can expect to see my face in our team meeting once a month. The first Monday of every month, we all meet as a group of 8 or 10 of us, and then they have one-on-ones with their manager every single week. And so I have a one-on-one with my 2 managers every week, but other than that, I'm not meeting with people constantly. I'm just like a big proponent of less meetings. Like less meetings, more work gets done. Especially in this season, full well like how limited my schedule is right now with having a 3 and 1-year-old at home. I have 2 days a week with childcare that I can really schedule all my meetings. The rest of them are done during nap time or they're done with a kid on my lap, and it's just a little bit more frazzled and less focused. So I really protect those 2 days a week and what gets put on my calendar. And if it's a meeting that maybe could be had with one of my managers where later in the month I can kind of hear what's the most important, have it kind of like rise to the top in the matter of urgency, that's been like a really successful action for me. And so I loved that I got to just pull people from my team existing, elevate their position. And then also what's been wonderful is as we're bringing on new people, I've trained them to be able to train the new people. So it's not overwhelming to me to say, oh, we got to hire another designer, because I'm not the one doing all of the onboarding, teaching them how we design for our clients. My chief design officer does that. So that's always, if you want to have some more foresight as you're looking to hire for your business for the purpose of scaling, which is kind of the topic that we're touching on today, there should always be a little bit more of that long-term vision here. It's like, okay, I'm hiring this person. What is her role? And can I get her in my head? Can I teach her things where she could then go and replicate herself in the same way that I have tried to replicate myself in her?
I love that. At some point, I do know that I am going to hire an operations person to manage the team. At one point, my team got to 17 or 18 contractors. And I was like, okay,
That's a lot. That's a
I
lot.
found my threshold.
Yeah.
I was like, but also some of it was just personality. Some team members just need a lot more touch than others.
True.
And so that's the other balance of this, is hiring people that they're not exactly like me, but they're so self-sufficient that they're not going to be the people that need something every single day.
Yeah.
And so that takes a little bit of tweaking. But yes, the goal at some point is to have an operations person. I think, quite frankly, if being blunt honest, I love my team and I love the touches with them. But I know that in order to continue to grow, I am going to have to pull myself out of that day-to-day stuff and have somebody
Yeah.
else do that. So no, I can respect how you've done it. And you're definitely more of a planner and organized. So,
Yeah, my season of life demands it. I think if I didn't have young children that, nothing challenges your priorities like having kids, right? Like having kids, having a job, because you do, for a short season of your life, you kind of sacrifice your schedule, your desires, and you put your kids in front of you. And so I'm just like right in the thick of that right now. Now, my oldest goes to kindergarten next year, and obviously it's bittersweet, but like I'm low key so excited to have, I've never had BrandWell without either a full-time job or having a baby or a newborn home. So I think to be able to have 5 days a week where I get to actually work on my business every day, I think I'm actually going to step a little bit more back into the day-to-day, even though I've been quite removed from it over the last couple of years as I raise my family.
I love that. I'm excited for you. Kindergarten's big.
I know.
So, if you had to, I guess, sum up 3 things that people should keep in mind when it comes to either hiring and or scaling with a team, what would you say?
Okay, so the first one is it doesn't have to be so intimidating. I talked about this topic a lot, and I hear from female entrepreneurs particularly that it's really scary to hire for 2 reasons. The financial side of it obviously is a little bit scary, and then just giving up control as an entrepreneur. But speaking to the financial side of it, you do not have to start with a W-2 employee. Tanisha and I both have experience, in hiring contractors. It's less risk to the business owner. It's easier to determine if somebody's not a good fit. You can kind of have this trial period where you work with somebody for 60 to 90 days. And if it's not improving your business and it's just not a good fit, then there's really no harm in just saying, okay, like we're done, no more projects.
Yeah.
So I would always recommend, if there's like a financial fear, then just start with a contractor. Most of my girls started with less than 5 hours a week. So that's a good place to start. And then on the giving up control, if that is your fear and why you're not getting into hiring, it really just comes down to hiring the right people. And recognize too that hiring somebody doesn't mean you're letting go on day one. I worked with my designers very closely for 6 months before I would let them communicate with the client on their own. But now that I've done that, like I said, they're now training the up and coming designers of BrandWell. So those are 2 ways where I think you can kind of reduce some of the fear that goes into hiring. The second piece of advice that I would give is really know the type of people that you're hiring and what's important to them. Company culture is a big thing for me. I have hired primarily Gen Z. So my girls are all like in their 20s for the most part. I do have a couple that are not in that window, but I know that Gen Z, they prioritize experience. They prioritize company culture more than, material possessions or owning a home or things like that. So I've been able to structure my offerings and these job positions that I'm creating to appeal to more people like who I want to hire. So I would say that's a good thing to look at, is what's important to these people. Do they want healthcare and benefits, or do they want a really flexible schedule with unlimited PTO?
Yeah.
Ask yourself those questions. Let's see, a third piece of advice. Okay, I'm going to give something that I feel like I'm kind of going through right now. But I was recently given some feedback that had me want to pivot a little bit in how I manage my team. I felt that, when I had contractors, I could be very like friendly, like, yeah, whatever works for you, and less, which is actually more in line with my personality. And then having, converting 2 of these contractors to managers, I did feel like, okay, now I have to like change my face. Like now I have to be the boss. Now I have to make sure that I protect that balance of like, how much personal life do I share with them? And it's funny because those employees that I hired, they were previously contractors. So we had a very friendly relationship beforehand. They actually had babysat my kids for me. And I was meeting with my sales coach who was training one of these employees. And she mentioned something to me on like, hey, make sure that you don't lose that personal connection with your employees. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And she just said, it's really easy when you have an employee to feel like, okay, now you're in boss mode and now you got to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing for 40 hours a week. But just because they're an employee, like, why did you make them an employee? Because you trusted them, right? So make sure that you don't lose that trust factor. Make sure that you still are adding value to their role beyond just the salary that you're paying them. And for me, I just needed somebody to tear down that wall for me, because previously my managers had a wall up. Like, there wasn't a lot of personal life conversations happening. And I feel that I'm just so grateful for my sales coach for kind of highlighting that as I'm still young and my team is young, because I felt like I was able to, of course, still, like I said, require much from my team and want them to perform at a high level, because I expect nothing less. But also, we can have that personal relationship. We can share about life outside of work. And that's a big part of why I do these retreats too, is to make sure that that's still there. Because I think that's really important for any good company culture, is that you can be human with your other coworkers, and you don't have to like put on a face for work that you then take off at 5 o'clock, but that you're the same person. And that's really benefited my team. I've noticed a change over the last few months since I've started to kind of take that wall down a little bit and just remember that I hired these girls because I trust them. And if I can trust them with my kids, I can trust them with my business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I love those tips, and the culture piece of it is extremely important, even dealing with contractors. I
Mhm.
think that's honestly the reason that I'd avoided calling my team or my setup an agency, because
Mhm.
I'd worked for agencies as a recruiter and in different positions. And in each case, there were those walls, or, the culture was toxic. And,
Yeah.
being a recruiter and as somebody asking you, what's the culture here? And you secretly wanting to tell them hey, run, like,
Yeah.
just turn around and go. But
Yeah.
that defeated the purpose of my job. I did not want that. And it didn't matter to me if they were contractors or
Mhm.
employees. I was like, I don't want anyone dreading opening their computer to see
Right.
these.
The Sunday scaries,
Yeah,
right? We don't want any
you know,
Sunday scaries
like
at
the
BrandWell.
anxiety comes where it's like, oh hell, here we go. So I'm like, be honest if you don't like a client, or if you're not feeling it, or if you don't like the type of work, because we can always kind of shift and change and stuff. So I
Yeah.
think it's amazing to see someone else who takes culture seriously, because I see the opposite quite a bit. Um,
Mhm.
but I love all the different ways that, again, we've had some overlaps and things that are similar, but
Mhm.
because of our different stages and seasons that we're in life, business, and everything else, we tweak it and kind of make it fit for us. So I really enjoyed talking to you about this today. Is there anything that you would like to share or promote or point people to?
One thing that I'll share about, because I think it's helped me a lot with hiring, and it's why I feel really confident hiring a large team while still protecting my brand. I think this is something that it can be a hang up for a lot of people. It's like, oh, if I hire people, how do I know that they're going to help maintain my brand's reputation? That's a really valid point. And like, from a brand designer, where this is what we live and breathe every day, like, protecting your brand is so important. And it's a lot easier to scale a company when you have your brand identity mapped out on paper. So that was a big part actually of why I created the Branding Business School, which is our, brand strategy course.
Okay.
And there's a module inside the Branding Business School all about hiring and scaling while still protecting your brand. Because I think, it can be really hard to hire that first person. And let's say you're hiring a social media intern. That ends up being a lot of people's first hires. Then it's a lot of like, okay, well, here, try and make it sound like me, or try and make it look on brand. But what if rather you could give them like, here's our brand's verbal identity. Here are the words and phrases that we use. Here's our brand style guide. Here are the fonts, colors, typography, assets
Yeah.
that we use. Then it's truly scalable, and it's not all of this hand holding where it makes hiring really hard. But you know that you can trust people because you've given them the toolkit that they need to excel in their position and to still protect your brand. So that's a big, I would say, underlying theme of the Branding Business School is like teaching people how to craft a brand identity that is scalable, that you can hire and you can still grow this brand exponentially without that fear of, well, nobody else is going to do it quite like me.
So make sure to send me the link to it so I can put that in
Yeah.
the comments so anyone who's interested can look it up and join. Victoria, thank you again so much. I am, side note, very proud that both of our households are still intact throughout this whole call.
I know. This has actually been a quiet call. My baby's sleeping upstairs. I just heard them start drilling again in the basement, but they took a nice lunch break.
Yeah,
So
like the
hopefully
dogs
it's disrupted.
behaved.
Yeah,
This is we did it. We survived it. And so thank
good.
you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you giving me time, especially since I know your schedule is very, very hectic-ish in the sense of just the balance of business and babies. And so I appreciate that you took some time out just to chat with me and make sure that we know where to follow you and everything. So if you send me your information, I will make sure that we put it in the comments of all of the channels so people know where to find you and BrandWell. And have an amazing day.